He made 5 different promises to 5 different groups in Congress on what the number would be for the continuing resolution, and then didn't deliver to 4 of those groups. Mike Johnson starts with a clean slate, and I think we will come together as a conference. We'll talk about the top line number and be able to move forward in a unified way.
I want to let your former colleague, Charlie Dent, ask you a question, but as you do, again, 3 weeks in one day, you were one of the 8 to kick out Kevin McCarthy. Given what we have seen, the tumult, the chaos for 3 weeks, was it worth it?
Yes, absolutely worth it. It's worth it because we need to have a unified message when we move forward into this next election season.
Yeah, Ken, I know this has been exhausting for everybody. I know you're glad to get through this ordeal. What do you think is going to happen now, though, when you come to November 17th? Do you really think that Mike Johnson will allow a clean funding vote? Because he's going to have to negotiate with the Senate. As you know, Kevin McCarthy got in a lot of trouble over allowing a clean funding vote as well as the debt ceiling. But Mike Johnson's going to have to cut deals both on this short-term spending bill, and then come December, you're going to have to finish the appropriations bill with an omnibus. I know that people don't like that word, but that seems inevitable. How do you think Mike is going to handle that?
Well, I think, Charlie, one of the things we're going to have is we're going to have a lot more appropriations bills done in the process, and so we'll have a lot more bills to send to the Senate to go into conference with. But I think everybody now is in more of a mood to compromise than they were 3.5 weeks ago.
I want to bring in Manu Raju, who is right off the House floor. Manu, as we see on the screen, Mike Johnson now has 127, 128 votes and counting. Nobody has voted against him yet. We believe 216 is the magic number. What are you seeing and hearing when it comes to the activity happening, not just on the floor, but off the floor?
Yeah, the writing's on the wall, I mean, quite literally. I mean, Kevin McCarthy is ready to move out of the Speaker suite. Already we've seen the sign ticking down. There's also been furniture and other items removed from the Speaker suite. That's been happening all throughout the course of the day as Kevin McCarthy plans to move into a different office. In fact, moving into a suite just nearby the House floor where Nancy Pelosi used to occupy, something that McCarthy has since uprooted her from that location, but McCarthy will go there. Dana, there's a big question about Kevin McCarthy's future. He has indicated he will serve out his term, but he played such a huge role fundraising for this party, trying to keep Republicans in the House majority. What will he do now? Will he step aside? Will he continue to serve? And will he play that key role that Republicans needed him to play to keep the House? Those are huge questions for the former Speaker, who is moving out of the suite that he has still occupied for more than 3 weeks, even though he was ousted 22 days ago, Dana.
Thanks, Manu. And I believe it's actually 215 that Mike Johnson needs, given the attendance at this vote. But it's almost irrelevant at this point because nobody's voting against him. Ken Buck, is it still possible for you or anybody else to vacate the chair, meaning kick Mike Johnson out the way that you did Kevin McCarthy? Does that rule still exist? And I should just say this is McCarthy who just voted for Mike Johnson.
Yes, absolutely. The rules haven't changed in the House. I anticipate that at some point a Republican member will move to change the rules. It goes to conference first, and then the rule would go to the floor. And I think that it's clear that there is a mood in conference now to raise that threshold from 1 vote to 5 to 10 or to a higher number.
So that this doesn't, forgive us, we're outside and it's busy behind us. So to raise the threshold so that you couldn't do it again with only 8 as you did before.
Well, you couldn't do it with 1 as we could have before, but
Yeah.
But we did have 8 vote for that.
Fair. Yeah, that's fair. Charlie Dent, the other thing that I'm thinking about are your colleagues who are like you were from battleground districts. So far, all of them have voted yes for Mike Johnson, and the Democrats who are writing the press releases, actually the press releases are already written, despite the fact that Mike Johnson doesn't have a long record because he hasn't been here very long. It's long enough from their perspective that they are sort of chomping at the bit to use these frontliners, these battleground districts, Republicans, to use Mike Johnson's record against them.
Yeah, I'm sure they will do that because obviously Mike Johnson doesn't have a very high profile nationally. And so I suspect the Democratic Campaign Committee is going to be working round the clock to define him. And they'll be going on the air and saying all sorts of things about Mike Johnson, election denial, and all those sorts of things. And I'm sure they'll be morphing the faces of those Republicans in the 18 districts that Biden won and morphing them into Mike Johnson and Donald Trump. I suspect that's what they are going to do. I would expect that. I think just kind of like what happened with Newt Gingrich, where they used Newt Gingrich as a piñata, just as Republicans used Nancy Pelosi as a piñata. Same thing's going to happen.
And on that note, Ashley, we should say that Marinette Miller Meeks, somebody from one of those battleground districts in Iowa, Mark Molinaro, one of the famous Republicans who won in New York, who helped bring the Republicans the majority, they both just voted for Mike Johnson.
Well, look, Republicans had to, and then we're still counting votes, but they had to get a speaker in place because without one, Democrats also are able to say they cannot govern. So it's important that they got in line, and we need to actually be able to have a functioning House. But I do think in these 18 districts, Democrats should have that conversation with their voters and talk about, you know, is Mike Johnson going to say that the election results are real and the consequences, if he doesn't say that, what that means for 2024. Also, if Donald Trump is the nominee, there's a great opportunity to link his belief of or denial of the election results of 2020 to the frontrunner of the Republican Party, which is Donald Trump. So, I mean, this is politics, unfortunately, at the end of the day. I would love also to have some conversations about Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security and abortion that everyday Americans do really care about. And Johnson is pretty conservative on those. And I think Democrats can run on those issues as well. So
Republicans are going to have to actually spend some time and money introducing Mike Johnson to the American people because they simply don't know him. But Democrats are going to do it for them if they don't do it first.
How well do you know him?
Mike was in the Freedom Caucus with me for, I think, 2 terms, and so I know him very well. I had dinner with him every night that we were, or every one night a week that we were in town. I also serve on the Judiciary Committee with Mike Johnson, so I know him very well from that.
What's he like to work with?
I think he's a really pleasant guy. You know, obviously we disagreed on the certification of the election. We've disagreed on other issues, but we've never had a harsh word towards each other.
Scott Jennings was just saying that he calls himself a conservative who's just not angry about it. Is that the way you would describe him?
Yeah, I would, and I think that, you know, George W. Bush was talking about compassionate conservatism, and I think that's one of the things that Mike portrays.
One of the areas that, one of the issues that helped sink Emmer, who you voted for several times on the House floor, was the fact that he supported same-sex marriage. And that is an issue that Mike Johnson, who is on his way to becoming the next Speaker of the House, does not support. Let me just tell you that the reason why they're clapping is because Nancy Pelosi, the former Speaker, the other former Speaker who's on the House floor, just voted for Hakeem Jeffries. How does that square with the way the Republican Party is in 2023?
Well, I think the issue of marriage has been settled by the Supreme Court. I don't think it's one of the top 10 issues that people are going to be campaigning on. So I don't know that it is something that's going to be out there either for or against either one of these candidates.
I didn't hear. I thought it was really unfortunate that one of the members made some comment about Tom Emmer, that he had to get right with Jesus over same-sex marriage. But I think the party needs to become much more socially tolerant on issues like this. I think when American people, hear Republicans fighting over this issue, I think the country's moved on. And this is a challenge for the party that if it wants to be a governing majority, it's going to have to get into a better place on some of these very sensitive cultural issues where we're just out of step, particularly with younger people right now.
I do think it matters, though, who's at the top of the ticket for the Republican Party. If you have right now it looks like Donald Trump is going to be the Republican nominee, and he leans into culture wars. But if you have a Ron DeSantis, who is the king of culture wars and going after transgender children and LGBT folks and African American history in his state, this is a conversation that's important. And if the Republican Party is not willing to support someone as Speaker because he supports same-sex marriage. I actually think that's out of touch with the overwhelming majority of the American people. It has been settled by the Supreme Court, but I think that backlash will be very similar to what you saw in 2022 when the Supreme Court overreached on abortion.
Congressman Buck, I know you have to get back to the floor. We're just looking at the votes now. 176 for Mike Johnson. No Republican has voted against him yet. And assuming that that trend continues, he will be the Speaker in a matter of minutes. Can you just take us inside the meeting last night that led you to settle on a guy who a lot of people, including your colleagues in the Senate, had to Google because they didn't know who he was?
Sure. It was an all-day meeting, and at first Tom Emmer was selected as the Speaker nominee, and it was obvious when he started having a conversation with the members who were against him that he wasn't going to move them. He withdrew. We went through another candidate forum. Mike was selected, and I think that really the people who nominated Mike, Kathy McMorris Rodgers, the people who support Mike, both from the Freedom Caucus and the other groups in the Republican conference were confident that Mike could get this job done. He could get the 217, which is the first and most important job of the Speaker.
Yeah, and come back to what you said initially, which is that he is the person who has, that was Steve Scalise, who just voted for Mike Johnson. Steve Scalise, another one of the Republicans who your conference nominated early on, but didn't even make it to the floor for a vote because he didn't have them. But just starting out again, because we're going to be learning a lot about this man who is heading towards not only getting the gavel, but being second in line for the President of the United States, because this is obviously a constitutional position. The fact that he didn't have baggage in this climate was the plus.
I think it was really
personal baggage.
Right. It's not the dispositive issue. It was certainly a very important factor in people's minds.
Thank you so much for coming over here and joining us. Wolf, I'm going to toss it back to you.
All right, Dana, thank you. It looks like Mike Johnson is getting closer and closer to becoming the next Speaker of the House of Representatives. John King, I just want to get your thought. He's 51 years old, Mike Johnson. He's the Republican representative from Louisiana. He was elected in 2016, sworn in 2017. We did some checking. He would be the first Speaker in 140 years with that limited amount of experience in the House.
And so at a time when people in both parties are asking for generational change, here's an opportunity. You're right. He will be tested, and the critics will say, you've never chaired a committee. You've only been here 7 years. You're not up to the job. You don't know enough. You don't know enough about how the institution works. You don't know enough about the policy challenges. That will be the criticism. And he knows that coming into day one. The question is, can he somehow do what no other Republican has been able to do? Republicans who have worked it for a decade or more, like a Kevin McCarthy, like a Steve Scalise, like a Tom Emmer. These are guys who worked the leadership, worked the members, helped raise money, helped win campaigns, helped recruit candidates. That's the traditional path to the speakership. Mike Johnson has done none of that. None of that. Now, that doesn't mean it can't work. But we don't have to look very far in the rearview mirror to see Speaker McCarthy was toppled. Congressman Scalise.
The House can always change their votes in the end. So let's see if he gets that 215 first.
Jeffries. Wild. Jeffries. Williams of Georgia. Jeffries. Williams of New York. Johnson. Williams of Texas. Johnson. Wilson of Florida. Wilson of Florida. Jeffries. Wilson
All right,
of
looks
South
like
Carolina.
Mike Johnson has the votes, 215. Given the vacancies, the absentees, looks like Mike Johnson now is about to become the next Speaker of the House of Representatives. Looks like the Republicans got their act together this time, and Mike Johnson of Louisiana will become, assuming there are no vote changes in the end, become Speaker. Let's listen in.
Johnson. Yakum. Johnson. Zinke.